So it is my great honor, and we are honored to welcome Dr. Bernard Bull back to the Lechnes Fellows Program. He's one of our alums. Bernard began his journey in higher education at Concordia University, Wisconsin. He spent 12 years there as both a professor and administrator, helping the institution become a leader in online and non-traditional models of instruction. I managed to go up and visit him at Concordia, Wisconsin, was just amazed at the structure. There were 24 instructional design folks there working on both online and non-traditional models. It was incredible. He left Concordia, Wisconsin to become the president of Goddard College in New England, which is a low residency experimental college. And he helped and actually led the movement of that institution from its probational accreditation to full status. He was named the new president of Concordia Seward, December 2021, and no, make that 2020, in December 2020, and assumed office last month, August 2021. His degrees, his undergraduate degrees from Concordia Chicago, his master's is from the University of Wisconsin, and his EDD is in digital technology from Northern Illinois University. So Bernard, welcome. Thanks for joining us as always, and you have the floor.
Thanks. Look forward to spending a little time with you all. Just remind me, Tom, of our time frame here. We do finish up at 1, right?
Well, yeah, on the hour, and the Zoom can run a little longer or shorter. It's no problem.
Okay, great. Look forward to spending a little bit of time with you. I've been given the broad topic of innovation to explore with you today, so that should be fun. We'll see where it goes. I do have a slide deck that we'll use just to kind of get the conversation going, but feel free to divert the conversation with your own inquiry, your own comments and questions, and we'll just sort of follow the trails wherever they might lead. Just a little bit more about myself. As was mentioned, I started my service in higher education at Concordia University, Wisconsin, but I spent about 12 to 15 years in K-12 education before that. When I turned 22, took my first job as a K-12 teacher, I also became really intrigued about the future and understanding trends and changing trends in culture and society. So I started, as I started my own graduate studies and my own reading, I developed some early skills around forecasting, tools used by futurists, some design thinking tools, innovation models. And I actually started doing pro bono consulting at 22 for nonprofit organizations that couldn't hire someone qualified. And by helping them and learning along the way, I actually developed a few skills and qualifications. And so while I was teaching K-12, I was really honored, humbled, surprised at the kind of interest there was. There were a lot of organizations out there wondering what was coming next and how they could prepare for multiple possible futures, and how they could position themselves well to embody their mission in new and changing contexts. So from there, over the next 10 to 15, 20 years, that led to a lot of consulting work. I worked with a lot of school startups, K-12 startups. I worked with state universities and other higher ed institutions that were launching new initiatives and their culture wasn't really ready to launch them. That became sort of a core part of my work. And then I started working with a lot of professional associations, the American Dental Association, or the General Dentistry Association, accounting associations. Harvard Business Publishing was one of my clients, as they were trying to adapt to the fact that Stanford was publishing their case studies for free online, and their bread and butter was selling case studies. So where do you go from there? Even had the honor of working with an economic task force at Markle, a Manhattan-based think tank that was chaired by Madeleine Albright, and got a chance to do some confidential, white paper work and research for groups. And that work has really taken me on a journey around the world. I've been honored to present and consult for groups in Australia and Southeast Asia and in Europe around sort of emerging views of credentials and future of informal learning. And it's been a really fun journey, but my heart is in Lutheran Christian education. So I would do this other work and I would learn all these amazing things. And then I'd try to figure out, how do I take some of this and bring it back to serve and support the mission that's so close to my heart in Lutheran education. which is really what led me to the roles that I had at Concordia University, Wisconsin, where I eventually served as a vice provost and the first chief innovation officer at that university. And my charge was largely to try to move initiatives faster than the culture was ready to embrace and to launch new initiatives. I was definitely not the one who spearheaded all of these, but had the honor of being part of a good 20 plus new program launches over my time there. A lot of new modalities and new models. And it was a real honor. And then ideas and models that I created for other groups. That's a lot of fun too. Oftentimes the place where I worked wasn't ready for a particular model, and so I'd give it away to someone else and they would take it. And those models are at place in different universities around the country. It's always sort of fun to watch and see those things grow, and some of them fail, and see why and what we can learn from that. So that actually led me to the presidency at Goddard College. I had never planned to leave the Lutheran Ed system for a long time, but I did step out for 3 years because in my study of innovation and experimental models of education, I'd come across this quirky hippie school in central Vermont. That's how it was identified. Everyone, I mean, it's not derogatory. That's a proud label in that community. So a quirky hippie school in central Vermont that produced the likes of David Mamet, the playwright, and William H. Macy, and the band Phish came from there. Last year, extended community members won Guggenheim Awards, Nobel laureate, and a MacArthur Genius grant, a lot in the arts and the like. But it had diminished, and its enrollment had gone from almost 1,000 at its peak to 350 students by the time I arrived. I took the job when it was actually not on probation. It had been given a going concern, which means they didn't have assurance that they'd even have accreditation. My first task on the job, before I even took the job, was to fly to Boston and convince them to give us probation instead of remove accreditation. And spent 3 years there doing everything I could to try to get the college stable. It had a multi-million-dollar deficit on a $7 million budget. At that point, it was that small. It had enough staff and faculty for 700 students, but only had 350 students. It had lost its all of its insurers had pulled back and said, we're not going to renew. So even liability insurance for me and our board was not covered when I arrived, or was being lost. Put on heightened cash management with the U.S. Department of Education. My first 3 months, the board chair died and a beloved member of the community took their own life. We had declining enrollment 7 years in a row, and the largest fundraising year on recent record was $250,000 in a year. And most of the donors were completely disenfranchised, and there was no way they were going to make any gifts. So we spent 3 years figuring out and the creditors said, you can't grow your way out of this. We don't want too many students to be at jeopardy. So no massive enrollment growths, launching new programs, nothing like that, not while you're on probation. You have to stabilize before you can do it. So imagine that. I mean, it's almost like you get your hands tied and then your feet tied, and then we're going to blindfold you, and then we're going to put earplugs in your ears. Now run to that other side of the room. And that was sort of the challenge. It was incredible, though. Part of why I went there was, as a Christian, coming from a conservative Lutheran Christian background, I really believed that there was that God had something to teach me about living, loving, and learning across difference. And Goddard tends to be considered sort of one of the more radical left-wing institutions, sometimes on the list of the 10 most radical left-wing institutions. So it was a great opportunity for me to learn what it means to love my neighbors who may hold beliefs different than I. And I think in this day and age, that's a particularly valuable and beautiful thing. And to do it in a way where we, stay faithful to our convictions, or I could stay faithful to my convictions. So I did that, and it was challenging. I will say that I'm emotionally, physically exhausted to this day. I still have not recovered. It was, I don't know if I would have done this to my family again. I had no idea what kind of psychological and emotional, physical wear that kind of intensity would create over a 3-year period. I even had two cloaked death threats, during that time from community members whenever I wanted to open up dorms for a COVID recovery center for foster care children. And so it was tense. And I learned to, a lot of great lessons about, God's provision and God's faithfulness, even in times of adversity. And so then, I had a call to come back to Concordia University, Nebraska. Come back, meaning the Concordia system, which has been a part of my life for a long time and I care deeply about. And I've been here a month, and I will say I've had people disagree with me, but it's really cool to have them say, I really disagree with you, but I'll be praying for you. I like that last part. That's pretty neat. Not that the church can't be cruel to one another. We manage to do that sometimes as well. So anyway, that's just a little more context about me. I'm passionate about innovation, but not innovation for innovation's sake. I believe in what I call mission-minded innovation, and that's what I'd like to introduce in our time here. So I'm going to take you on a little journey of a slide deck. Feel free. I'll try to pause a few times. I know I talk quickly. I get a little excited about these things, but I'll try to pause throughout and maybe finish so that there's ample time for us to have a little discussion and Q&A at the end if we don't intersperse that throughout. So with that said, let me see if I can pull up my slide deck and we will give this a go, as my Australian friends would say. All right, can you see, give me a thumbs up if you can see the slide deck. Perfect. Very good. So this is a quote that's often attributed to Abraham Lincoln. Who knows if he said it or someone else? Most quotes are from Einstein or Lincoln these days, it seems. So I didn't actually put it in here, but it's most often attributed to Lincoln, that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I'll just throw that out as a thought-provoking quote as we get started, because that's really how I think about innovation studies. Is a lot of it is sort of looking at our identity, our mission, our unique traits as an organization, each of us looking out at the world, at what's happening now, and trying to get a sense of where things may be going, and then making some decisions about how you're going to respond to that, whether that means doubling down on what you're doing now, whether it means adjusting or adapting in some kind of way. I mean, it can take a lot of different forms. So I give this picture, though, because this is a cutting-edge technology of its day, a cutting-edge medical technology of its day known as a skull saw. And it was used, obviously, to cut through a skull in order to perform medical procedures that required such an effort. I won't go into any more detail. Sorry about that, Catherine, just a little TMI there. But the reason I share it is, if I had a need for a surgery that required getting through my skull, and I sat down with a doctor and the doctor said, by the way, I just want to assure you, we're going to take good care of you, and we do not risk your life on these newfangled tools and technologies. We use the tried and tested tools of the past. And then the doctor pulls this out. I guarantee you I would be seeking a second opinion, right? And I would suggest that, we are in an era in education, and that's not just about technologies, but sometimes we have some kinds of pedagogical blind spots, moral blind spots, and other things like that in our institution. And maybe they were okay for a certain time in a certain context, and they were allowing us to embody our beliefs, our values, and our mission effectively and faithfully. But over time, things have shifted, and those practices might not be serving us as well, and might not be enabling us to serve our students. And that's part of why I believe strongly in the notion of mission-minded innovation. It's really attending to our mission and asking and attending to what's happening in the world around us, and then determining where to go. It's a great quote. A CEO who was the CEO of Chegg at the time, which was a textbook company that was really a data mining company, that they made most of their money by collecting data from their users later. But they said the winning and surviving learning organizations will be the one that put the students first. And I would say that that may be true, and it is true, and I believe in that deeply. I would start by saying that the winning and surviving organizations will put their missions first, and through those missions serve their students faithfully. So I would say mission and students first, if you can have two firsts. I have a copy of this. This is actually the original Mr. Potato Head. And the reason I have a copy of it is because if you open up this box, it's a radically different toy in its first iteration than it is today. the first iteration of Mr. Potato Head, if you open it up, you just read, it says, any fruit or vegetable makes a funny face man. In other words, there was no potato head in the box. There is no potato head in this box. You open it and there are literal like needles with plastic pieces glued onto the end that make up an ear and eyes and a nose. And basically the idea of the toy was you buy this for your kid and they can run through your kitchen and pull out a banana and make a funny faced person with it. Only there were a few problems with this. First of all, this is a toy that came out not far after the Depression. And so we have some people who are particularly sensitive to wasting resources like food. So we've literally created a toy that teaches kids to play with their food and waste it. And I can envision the little girl or little boy having like 5 rotten apples and bananas underneath their bed and refusing to let go of them because they're like their precious dolls or toys, and they're just sitting there, inviting rodents and insects into the house. Not only that, but over time, there were some other complexities to this brilliant idea of a toy, and that's that they're giving children needles to play with. So that was problematic, and they figured, okay, we might need to make some adjustments. So they did, and instead of the needles, they created these plastic items. And then in order to address the food problem, they put this little styrofoam potato in there that didn't hold up very well, but that would break off, and little children would sometimes eat the styrofoam, which is apparently not very healthy. And these things are not particularly, the ears are not to be eaten either. So we have choking hazards. As a result, future iterations create bigger ears and bigger eyes and noses that can't be swallowed as easily. And they created the plastic Mr. Potato Head. And then somewhere, and this is not data that I have readily available, I can't prove this one, but somewhere along the line, there must have been people accusing them of teaching poor anatomy, because the current Mr. Potato Head, at least one of them that I have, there may be multiple versions, you can only put the ear where the ear belongs. I mean, the fun part as a kid, if you remember this, was you could put the ear where the eye was and make a funny faced figure and something odd, but heaven forbid we teach poor anatomy in our children's toys, so they fixed that problem as well. Well, what does that have to do with innovation? I share it because that's exactly how we oftentimes evolve and develop policies and procedures and practices in our organizations and institutions. We're sort of responding and adapting to the problems as they arise. And over time, maybe we end up with a modern toy that works and is still desirable, or maybe we end up with something that's far less exciting and interesting. And along the way, we also may end up creating a Rube Goldberg machine of an organization where the policies and practices may make sense individually, but collectively, they don't really come together to help us deepen our commitment to our mission, serve our students faithfully, embody our most deeply held beliefs and values. In fact, they may unintentionally be contradicting or undermining those core goals and those core aspirations. So for me, that's part of why I believe in the importance of mission-minded innovation, is because it's a call for us to continually, perpetually revisit these matters and topics so that we can indeed be faithful to our mission, even as we're exploring what that means in a changing world and a changing context. Michael Crow, love him or hate him, people have different views, but the president of Arizona State University, sometimes considered to be one of the more innovative or the most innovative state universities in the United States, gave a presentation a few years ago, all the way back in 2013. And he said something that really caught my attention. He said, there are really 3 types of universities that he's seeing, or higher ed institutions. There are the elite institutions that have massive endowments, and they have far more applicants than they are intending to accept. And they're in some ways insulated from the need to change and adapt as quickly as other places. And for them, in some ways, innovation is not necessary, but it's a great pastime, and they might enjoy it and pursue it because they have the money, time, resources to do so, and they don't necessarily have a lot of stress pushing them in that direction, or a lot of pressure pushing them in that direction. And then you have the bulk of institutions that he would call industrial age institutions. They still embody the kind of values and priorities of an industrial age sort of era. And he would argue that some of those are working well. I mean, they often talk about scalability and efficiency and They're interested in the use of technology, sometimes even for its own sake, it seems. And that he would argue that these are institutions that are desperately in need of exemplars and desperately in need of getting more informed about the possibilities available to them today that may be far more helpful in achieving their mission. And then there are a small category that he would put in called the innovative universities. And these are the ones that he'd argue are beginning to break away from the pack. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily just rapidly growing enrollment. It may just mean that they're building strength and stability as a foundation from which to embody their mission in the world. And maybe some of them are intentionally small. Some of them are, intentionally trying to grow and reach as many people as possible, and many of them are somewhere in between. But they have established a culture of mission-minded innovation that allows them to not necessarily compete with everyone around them, but to truly have a differentiated approach, so that they're providing something that's distinct and that's rare within the higher education landscape. And so if you want it, you go to them. And so the question of why innovate is for me, it's really about trying to remain faithful to our mission, our identity, our beliefs and values, and serving our students faithfully. When we talk about innovation, by the way, I won't go through all these items, but just my own distinction, we talk about creativity versus innovation. I'm putting creativity, and these aren't perfect definitions, but sometimes when people talk about creativity, they talk about, great ideas and thinking outside the box. When I talk about innovation, I'm talking about getting insights and then turning them, shaping them into new and promising solutions to problems. Or I'm talking about converting an idea into a successful and desirable outcome for your organization. I'm talking about creating a desirable change in order to solve a problem, in order to create a new opportunity, or in order to amplify your mission and your impact in a way that's important to you. Or if we are going to use the box analogy, I would say that innovation is less about thinking outside the box, and it's more about remodeling the box or extending the mission beyond the box, because missions are wild. They're not things to be tamed. They're things to be followed into unexpected terrains and unexpected places, if we have the courage and the character and the wisdom to do so. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into this. By the way, you'll hear me use this language of problem or possibility framing. Sometimes when people talk about innovation, they're often looking at it in terms of problems. And certainly if you're a student of leadership and you've read Kotter's books, Kotter often talks about creating a sense of urgency. You want to sort of create a problem that helps motivate people, or you want to highlight the problem so we're motivated to try to solve it. And that's okay, and that can be used, and it has its role. Sometimes that can easily turn into a fear-based approach to innovation. And the problem psychologically is that fear is not our friend when we're trying to think outside the box and pursue new opportunities. In fact, for most of us, when we're fearful, we're less willing to consider new possibilities, even when it's exactly what we need to get out of the situation. And so problem framing has its time and its place, but I'm a big advocate whenever possible of doing what I would call possibility framing. So even when you're identifying a problem, trying to turn it into something that's about a new possibility for embodying our mission. Like what is, and I don't think this is just semantics. I do think that this kind of change in language, this change in metaphor, it can really shape the way that we think and we act in specific ways. The idea here is also, if you're thinking about possibility framing, we often find ourselves in our organizations and we come across a new situation or problem or whatever else it might be, and we often in our minds are looking at this. We have two options. Do we go left or do we go right? But possibility framing asks whether we go these are two roads that exist, but there's no reason why there can't be a road straight ahead or one to the far right or to the far left or behind you or somewhere else, or maybe, we get Tom involved and we hop in a plane and we go up. There are endless amounts of possibilities here. It's just a matter of where you want to go, where you want to get. And so innovation studies, this kind of thinking, I find it helpful because it allows us to realize that there are often far more options available to us than what we are seeing at the moment. And I'm going to skip this. I had so many analogies in here. I'm just going to skip them for time so we can have good discussion in a bit. Another way that, as we were just talking about innovation, is in the Lutheran tradition, we sometimes talk about the idea of vocation, which is the idea that we're called to love our neighbors, but it's really God loving our neighbors through us, that we're the masks of God. And you know, as a farmer embraces and does their work, or we're milking a cow, that it's God providing these resources to other people through our work and our labor. And so that's a concept that I find really valuable in framing innovation as well. And I'll tell you a story of a person that was really interested in figuring out kind of where he was going to go with his life. And he had a variety of interests. He did have this Christian tradition in which he grew up, and knew that he was called to love the neighbors in the world, and to figure out, you know, which neighbors is he called to love, or which neighbors will he be called to love. And he was a deeply spiritual man, and he was also very, very interested in the way that this new technology of the day that was finding its way in more and more homes very rapidly was impacting the lives, especially of young people, and was disturbed by how that was happening. He had a real interest in possibly teaching and working with youth and everything. And so for him, this Venn diagram led him to creating something that became known as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And that was sort of the Fred Rogers journey of, and literally inspired. I've talked to his wife. I've talked to two of the leading scholars on Fred Rogers' life, and this concept of love of neighbor was a central part to what he was trying to do. And so I often suggest that when organizations are thinking about and trying to prepare for pursuing new opportunities, it doesn't hurt to kind of go through a similar exercise with your organization and ask, what is our neighborhood? The reality is, I mean, are we called to love all neighbors? Yes, in a sense, but the reality is you're not going to interact with every neighbor. And there's some neighbors you're better positioned to love and help than other neighbors because of their unique gifts, talents, abilities, positions as an institution. And so really getting clear about your neighborhood and what is that for your organization. This is really important foundation work, I believe, for pursuing mission-minded innovation and not just chasing shiny objects, which I see a lot of in education. The chasing shiny object approach is you go to a conference, you learn about a new innovation or initiative, and then you say, oh, we need to try that. And unfortunately, school leaders, principals, and presidents, we can be the worst at that. We come back from a conference and somehow form a task force to launch a new initiative because I read a book on this or whatever it might be. Another way that I look at this, and this comes from some research that I did, I'm going to take you into in just a moment, is I'm a big fan of figuring this out for your organization. When I studied leaders of innovative organizations, I studied over 100 organizations for one research project I did years ago, and then added to that over time and more informal observations and studies. I found that the schools that were sort of identified as highly innovative and effective in embodying their mission through innovation, that they had what was called an unavoidable, undeniable school shaping concept. And it's unavoidable in that if you are a part of that organization, you can't hide out from it. You can't just sort of close your door and do your own thing. It's so central to who you are that it's there. It's kind of expected of everyone. And there's a kind of positive peer pressure to embody it. It's undeniable because if you visit it, you can't miss it. It's really hard to miss it. It's not sort of, you know, hidden in a corner over there or being done by a few people. And then school shaping, meaning that it's something that truly is institution-wide, and it shapes the decisions that you make. And I use the analogy of the strainer for this last part, meaning that, I mean, new ideas, new initiatives, new possibilities, they have to go through this strainer. And if they slip through the strainer, then they don't fit. They're not truly school shaping. If the strainer catches them, that's something that is worth pursuing. It aligns with your 1, 2, or 3 unavoidable, undeniable school shaping concepts. Once more, I believe these are really important if you're going to embrace mission-minded innovation and not just sort of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. these are strainers or things that are undeniable, unavoidable. They guide each decision. That you sift programs, projects, ideas, policies, practices through them. They give you a distinct identity. They're used by the most innovative and effective mission-minded institutions. They're used constantly and relentlessly. And leaders often take a no exceptions, tough-minded approach to these particular concepts that are established. And by the way, this can be quite broad. It can be, certainly as a Lutheran Christian institution, I would say, for example, at our institution, Lutheran identity can and should be one of those. But it can also be things like certain approaches to teaching and learning. The experimental college I was at was a learner-driven institution. Every learner got to design their own learning plan every semester. And every faculty member agreed to that model. So it was unavoidable, undeniable, and school shaping. So it can take a lot of different forms. And so the question is, if you were to assess your own institution, does it have a strainer, one or more strainers, and what are those? And really begin to use those for the powerful innovation tools that they are. And there's another one that's an analogy that Walgreens, actually, I'll share this. I was in a Starbucks mentoring a young student back in Wisconsin, and we were talking, and I saw this young woman with this shirt from Walgreens on, and it was a little awkward because, I'm like a 50-year-old man, and I go up and I ask this 20-year-old girl if I can take her picture, and then I had to clarify, oh wait, that's not what I meant. I just wanted to get the picture of the quote on the back of her shirt. So once we got through that awkwardness, I took this picture, and it says, every day I help people stay and live well. And the reason I like it is it's a kind of, Walgreens created this as sort of a tool for their employees to help them frame their work around what's most important to their organization, whether they really did it or not. I like the concept of what I now call an everyday statement, which is to invite people in your organization to frame their work, regardless of what it is, whether I'm working in the library, whether I'm a faculty member, I'm in admissions, I'm in whatever area, and ask, what's your everyday statement? What work do you do? And frame it in terms of how your work contributes to the mission, the identity, the values of the organization. So admissions, my mission is not to get seats, rear ends and seats. My mission is probably, my everyday statement is every day I have the opportunity to talk to people who are considering what God might have in store for them next. And I have that privilege of sitting down and talk with them and seeing whether or not we might be the place that can help them in that next part of their journey. Like, that's a far more compelling everyday statement. Getting people talking missionally and so forth, all of this, I contend, is critical to really effective mission-minded innovation. This is another one. If you know the Simon Sinek stuff, you've probably seen this about a compelling why. That's another way of getting at it. What's the compelling reason for why you exist? And and that's another frame that you can use to get at mission-minded innovation. And here's the last one that I'll share before going on to this next piece. Why do college students fall asleep in class? There was a doctoral dissertation done on this question years ago, and they used a form of research called grounded theory, where you interview a number of people who've experienced a shared phenomenon like falling asleep in class. And from that, you begin to develop a tentative theory. And then you test that theory with each new person that you interview until you reach what's called redundancy, so that every new interview seems to kind of validate the theory that you've established. And at that point, you have established what's called a grounded theory. And so this person did this, and he asked the question, why do college students fall asleep in class? And the conclusion of his research was perceived meaninglessness. Had nothing to do with whether they were working 2 jobs or staying up late or anything else like that. It was, they perceived whatever was happening in that class to have meaning, to have a lack of meaning for them, or a low level of meaning for them. And in the absence of meaning, people fall asleep. So this is where I would frame the same thing can happen for organizations. Why do schools fall asleep? Why do organizations, sorry about the apostrophe S there, fall asleep? I don't know how that got in there. But why do organizations and schools fall asleep? And again, it calls for even really deeply mission-minded institutions I've seen asleep, because they've identified with their practices more than their mission. And sometimes, and they're just sort of going through the standard protocols and practices, not realizing that it's hindering them from actually serving the students in the way that they're called to serve. And they're sort of tying in. I'm a big fan of tradition. It has an important role in my life and in our lives. But whenever it becomes meaningless tradition and we don't understand the why behind it, that's where it becomes problematic. Another analogy that I just use is a birdhouse. I often ask people, tell me how to build a birdhouse, and I prime them with this photo, and they say, well, what do you need to build a birdhouse? You need a drill and a hammer and some nails and some wood, and they come up with an idea of a birdhouse. And then I prime them with this picture, and I say, how do you build a birdhouse? And then they say, oh. Right. So the mission was the same, to build a birdhouse, to build something, a structure that meets the needs of a bird that can, that it can use. But your solution can be wildly different. And this is the distinction that I think is critical for building a culture of innovation, is getting people to make the shift from always framing possibilities and solutions around the current materials to framing possibilities around the current mission, beliefs, values, and identity, and then allowing things to take you in unexpected places. That's a pretty exciting journey. So I'll stop after this and see if we can do some Q&A, but I'll give you 10 traits of innovative leaders. And this comes from my own study of 100+ organizations. These are really not innovative leaders, but they're leaders of organizations that have met sort of a set of criteria I established for organizations that demonstrated effectiveness at mission-minded innovation. And so here's what I came up with in that study. One is the leaders were visionary, but they didn't necessarily have to be incredibly creative or earth-shattering inventions that they had in mind. That's, I believe, a misconception or a myth. And many people say, I'm the implementer. I'm not really good at the new ideas and the new possibilities. It doesn't have to be that way in my experience. What we do need, though, is to be deeply embedded into our mission and our identity and our beliefs, so much so that we're willing to follow them in uncomfortable and unexpected places. And that's the kind of visionary leadership that I saw in these leaders very regularly. The second is they had one or two, and I'm willing to even go to three, unavoidable, undeniable school shaping concepts like I described before. And they had those really clear in their mind, and they helped their organization stay focused upon those core pieces. A third one is I did notice that from the leaders in these places, they were sometimes seen as intimidating figures. And I don't know if that's necessary or required, but it was common in the pool of leaders that I studied. So they had a mindset where they were often compassionate, good listeners, they were good with relationship skills, but when it came to the unavoidable, undeniable school shaping concepts, they had a tough mindset. I would say, well, what do you do if there are people in your organization who don't buy into this core concept? And their response was literally tough. This is who we are. This is what we do. And didn't mean they necessarily fired them, but some honestly did. They just didn't tolerate it very long. They would rather get people on board who buy in and they're on the same page. This isn't just on the same page with the big, broad identity and mission of the organization, though. This is especially as it relates to kind of the direction you're going with a new initiative. The fourth one is that they weren't like, it wasn't like they were going to necessarily spend 20 years studying something before they were willing to take action. But they did dig deeply. Some of these people were ready, fire, aim kind of people. So they did want to get things going quickly. But even those people, when you talk to them, it was impressive how much work they'd done. And the research could have been in the form of observations of other places, interviewing people, studying scholarly research. I mean, it could have come from small experiments that they conducted to gain insights on what to do next. But some form of research and study, it was extensive. And I think I often caution leaders about this because sometimes people see a new idea or initiative and they just want to, again, just sort of throw it against the wall. But the effective leaders do take the time to get to know their stuff. And then the fifth one was, once the vision was clear, they would build a strong alliance internally internally and externally, by vision rather than proximity. So, and this was because a lot of the schools that I studied, University, this is more common, but in K-12, it used to be that K-12 schools, they'd often just interact with their colleagues in nearby schools. But even universities would do that, maybe by your athletic conference or the ones that are in the same city as you, and they would partner around that. Well, the part that's different is around these leaders is they would build an alliance and they would build partnerships and just people to bounce ideas off. It didn't matter where they were in the world. They sought people who had a shared interest in the same vision. And that's really how they built their networks, not by just circumstance or sort of the locality or something like that. They truly sought people out who had a common vision. The sixth one is a near obsession with progress, effectiveness, and impact data. Now, not all of them were number crunchers. Some of them were very interested in more qualitative data, and they were just wandering the halls or whatever and talking to people informally and just kind of gleaning insights that way. But what was true universally among this pool of leaders is that they wanted people to tell them that what was working and what was not. They wanted the bad information too. They weren't afraid of it. They were asking that information. They wanted to surface it. They weren't trying to hide it because it was uncomfortable and they didn't want to have to deal with the problem. They were really, really interested in this. And then this is one that's unpopular whenever I share it, but for many of these places, when they're pursuing these initiatives, some of them had unusually high turnover at certain phases of the innovation because people had to make a decision about whether or not they wanted to be on board. And remember, these were leaders with a tough mindset. They were going to move forward on this one way or another. They believed once they did their research, once they were convinced it aligns with their mission and it was best for their institution, they're moving forward. So either you're going to get on the boat with them or you're probably not going to stick around. And maybe, there were really wonderful ways that some did it. Maybe they just helped them move to another place in the institution that wasn't quite as critical to the innovation. Lots of ways that it showed up. But it was also unusually high turnover when done within an established culture. There was less turnover in places that were kind of starting new, or they used a silo approach to innovation. That's where you take an innovation and you kind of create a school within a school that's protected from the existing set of beliefs and values and culture, and you allow it to grow on its own and to kind of incubate and get mature on its own until it can stand up on its own 2 feet, and then you can drop down the walls and let the two cultures interact a little bit. Usually people drop the wall too early. If you drop it within the first 3 to 5 years, it almost always assures that the new innovation will be destroyed by the old one, unless there are a few exceptions to that. But there's this, and then also depending upon the rate of change, the turnover is obviously higher the faster you have to make the change. People don't adapt as quickly as we sometimes want or think, and so those are factors that one can adjust in order to shift how much turnover may actually happen. And then 8 is they tend to be highly protective of who they put in the water. And what I mean by that is just very selective about the people that they add to their teams, because they want everybody on board with the same vision, same mission. Now there's certainly, time to have opposing viewpoints and different perspectives. It doesn't mean that they were trying to get, yes people, but they wanted people who were yes on a few key areas. And you can have lots of diversity and disagreement in other parts. You want, if you're going north, you want everyone to agree that north is where we want to go. Maybe people have disagreements on the best way to go north, and that's fine, but you need to have at least a shared direction. And then the 9th one is a lot of time and money put into ongoing professional development as they started to grow. So these are places that were not afraid to make some pretty significant investments in people in order to feed the leadership for the future of this new initiative or new innovation, whatever it might be. And that's, wonderful examples of literally some that would send someone away for 12 months to another university and pay for their time and everything just to develop this skill, or that could come back and help them take the next step in their journey, or other kinds of ways of investing in the professional development. And the last one is just, as they began to find some success, I found that there was an incredible generosity and excitement to share among these leaders, and they were committed to sharing their secret with others. But there was a ulterior motive to this sharing. They were sharing with others because they wanted to see this grow in the world. They believed that it was not just about their institution, but now it was even bigger than their institution. And they thought that it was worthy of something that it shouldn't be just contained within one organization. They wanted to see it grow. And the other ulterior motive is they share their secrets because that's how you get feedback, because they would talk to other people and then they would get even more feedback and learn how to refine and adapt. So I will stop here in 3 minutes so we can at least do a little Q&A. So with all of this that I've shared, where do we go from here? I'll just give a few quick thoughts. One, maybe try this who is your neighbor exercise with a group and see where that gets you and see if that gleans some insights, observations. A second one is ask this question: am I deeply informed about the possibilities? If you're looking at a particular problem or area within your organization, take the time to do that research like these leaders. Get informed, go interview people. Use the excuse if you're in higher education, it's great. I used my title as a professor all the time to get to do interviews with some of the leading experts in the world on all sorts of topics. I got to interview Howard Gardner 3 months ago from Harvard, who's sort of the one who popularized multiple intelligences, and Angela Duckworth on grit. And it's rare that I have someone say no to me. Yes, I've had a few presidents of the US say no to me, but I mean, in lots of spaces, people are incredibly generous with their time. So get informed, observing, reading, interviewing people. I think actually observations and interviews are heavily underutilized for change agents and leaders. We often turn to books and articles, maybe as academics, and we forget to actually have conversations and go see what it looks like somewhere else. Try to get actionable insight or real evidence and let that trump data, let that trump hunches and preferences. I've seen this happen over and over, that the leader in the room, their decision, their path forward is what is what you use, because it's their preference, as opposed to because it's really what's going to help us. And so there's a posture of humility that I think is important for us as Christians as we approach innovation. And we allow our hunches to be debunked and our preferences to be disregarded for the sake of the greater mission. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's not beautiful when it happens to you. I don't always enjoy it, but in retrospect, I find a lot of joy in watching that happen, even in myself. And then challenge, reframe, or question the can't. There's always going to be a resistance to new initiatives. It's just how we're wired as people. We have a craving for novelty and a craving for consistency at the same time in our brains. So there's a civil war always going on in us. And so I always encourage people to try to play around when we hear the I can't or the roadblock. See if we can't ask some questions that open things up, reframe it, challenge the idea that it really is a can't. Well, okay, if it is a can't, what would turn the can't into a can? What would we need in order for that to be a can? And so try to invite some possibility thinking and questioning. And then I'm a big fan of using history and historical context. Get to know your organization, its traditions, its historical context. So you know sort of that's important. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself stepping on landmines left and right. And then another one related, it's kind of another metaphor of the same thing, is load-bearing walls. So every organization has policies and practices that have been in place and have become so central to the stability of your organization that if you were to knock that policy out, a dozen other things would fall, and maybe the ceiling would fall in on you as well, figuratively speaking. So paying attention, and when you're beginning to make changes, check to determine, try to figure out, is this a load-bearing wall? You know, what's the ripple effect of changing this on other offices, units, other people? This isn't easy to do, but it's critical. And obviously, if you find a load-bearing wall, it doesn't mean you can't move it, but you have to give the same kind of a care and attention to that you would if you were running into a load-bearing wall in your house in a remodel. You're going to have to bolster it up with something else, and obviously do it with care and compassion. And again, lead with one or more of those unavoidable, undeniable school shaping concepts. And the last one that I'll give you is Bullets Before Cannonballs, which comes from what's the original book with Bullets Before Cannonballs? Great by Choice, but what's the one before Great by Choice? Oh, good, great. It's right here. It's on the it's on in the book. Collins talked about this as well, which is I always find it useful. People like to just start with a big innovation and just launch it. But there are usually ways that you can conduct experiments. You can test something out and test the waters, try it out. Doesn't mean that it has to be exactly like the big thing, but you get actionable insight that will give you wisdom to take the next steps. So I find a lot of wisdom in that. These are 3 books that I find really helpful in using this approach. The one on the right is my single most favorite innovation book, called The Innovator's Hypothesis. It's about how to create experiments. The controversial quote from in Michael Schrage's book is, "Good ideas are bad for organizations." He argues you need to get rid of ideas and shift to experiments. So that'll whet your appetite if you want to check it out further. Last one, I have a mentor, Dr. Ross Stieber. I got to know at Concordia, Wisconsin. I was trying to determine whether or not to move forward with a particular initiative. And the reality is sometimes other organizations can do something better than you. And maybe it's good to just let them do it because they're in a better position to do it. And maybe you support them and cheer them on or partner with them rather than try to do it yourself. But there are some opportunities that will emerge that align with your mission so well, and you're so well positioned to be able to do it. Or maybe there's no one else willing to step up to the plate. And I believe that that's a sign that that is a mission-minded innovation worth pursuing. So I'm going to stop right there and let's open it up for some Q&A. I'm going to go look in the chat while others, feel free to just jump in if you have a question, but I will just read here. Ignore my, let's see, Bernard, we see it in presenter view. Oh, you saw the whole thing in presenter view. You guys are so gracious. You didn't even interrupt me. I have dual screen, so it must have been on the wrong screen. We can have both mission first and serving students first. Oh, good. Yes, agreed. Any questions? What are your questions, your comments?
Bernard, if you don't mind, if you could send me the slides, I'll post them on our website also.
Will do. Ben, are you using the little hand? Did you have something you wanted to share or ask?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much, Bernard, for the presentation. Great to see you again. I wanted to ask a little bit about going back to the strainer metaphor, the school-specific thing. Could you give some examples of that? I really like that idea, but I was just couldn't quite break open what exactly that would be like. So a few examples maybe would be helpful.
Sure. The most evident ones I've found were actually on the K-12 level, because in higher ed, one of the core values in higher education is often faculty autonomy. And so it's really hard to have a full group of faculty who all agree on some kind of educational model or philosophy, right? But with that said, I would say an example might be, and I've seen this on university level or on the K-12 level, a school that really believes in the philosophy of classical education or great books. And everybody in the place buys into that, and that's a core. And it's not like you're going to have someone not use great books. Everybody's on board, or at least everybody within your unit or your group. And that allows you to have a true distinctiveness, because it's not just sort of, the identities of 8 people who happen to be working together, but it's sort of a shared identity around that concept. Similarly, I've seen it with project-based learning. I've seen it in engineering schools that have committed themselves to, we are going to approach there's going to be a hands-on, team-based, non-competitive approach to learning, where we're going to learn it's about how you help the person next to you come together to solve a wicked problem. And we're going to do real-world problems for our curriculum all the way through. And I mean, that's an example of a unavoidable, undeniable school shaping concept. But it could also be something, and I've not seen this as strong before, but it could be a relational kind of school shaping concept too. Like, how do we relate with one another? And maybe it's, we believe in true mentoring. None of this sage on the stage who just goes up there, presents your content, and then walks out of the room and only interacts with students when you grade their papers. We actually believe in getting to know every student and every student getting to know us, because we believe that it's our expertise and our mentoring them into, helping them with their formation that's most critical. Like, that's not a common, you don't have many institutions where everybody buys into that kind of educational philosophy, but those are a few examples of what I'd call unavoidable, undeniable school shaping concepts.
Thank you.
Dr. Bull, thank you very much for this. My question was also about the strainer concept. I was curious what your impression was of what the strainer of Lutheran identity actually means for our institutions in today's context, because I'm not sure we would all answer that question the same way from all of our different institutions.
Yeah, and I would say Lutheran identity is a critical part of expression of our beliefs and our values and our mission. And I've thought about this back and forth. I've actually given different answers over the years to this question. And here's where I am right now with it. So at this point, I'm not sure that Lutheran identity is a strainer. It's a part of our mission and our values, but I'm not sure if it works the same way like a strainer. I mean, I'm not saying that to diminish it. I mean, it's like, because a strainer is not, your mission and your core beliefs and values are above your strainer. Your strainer is kind of a step below that. And so I would say that the strainer metaphor or concept is much more helpful when you're thinking about sort of a shared philosophy or a shared practice than it is with something like, our Lutheran identity, that can be unpacked in volumes, right? In terms of, but you can certainly, I think where it would become a better strainer is to say, we're going to have a really core commitment around the doctrine of vocation, and that will inform our work in a distinct. David's working on a writing project. So I could see that be a much more effective strainer if you take it down to something that you can get a shared understanding around. I mean, you're not going to, you can have some commonality around Lutheran identity, but depending upon your organization, not everyone's going to read all of Luther's works or all of Pieper's dogmatics even, or whatever, pick your favorite pieces. But you can narrow that down to something succinct that could really serve well from an innovation standpoint.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Bull, for presenting today. I really enjoyed it and appreciated your take on everything. My question would be about, you mentioned leading a large group of people who are all at different places and spaces, right? And some have been at the university for a long time and think things should go this way. Others think things should go another way. What are some tent poles that one would be able to put down to kind of get everybody on the same page at a particular time and space, right? So that they can think through some of these issues. I think that the reason why I ask that is sometimes I feel like the water is not slowed down enough, right? For people to be able to actually think through new ideas and the way that a university or an organization is going. So what are some really helpful tools to be able to make that happen?
Yeah, so when I start, thank you for that very much. The reason I led with a lot of that talk around kind of the mission identity, and I threw some different metaphors out, is because I find that to be one of the more powerful tools when you have the time to use them. So it's not always possible to do this without a measure of discomfort and dissension even. My last job, when I took the job, we did not have enough money to make payroll 3 months into the future. So there was not going to be any consensus building strategy that I could use in that time frame. All I could do is try to embody as much compassion as possible, listen and learn as much along the way, and make the tough decisions of having to let some people go and some other things like that. I mean, that was a little bit different. So assuming you're not in crisis mode, you're not in that kind of position, that's where I really do find, before even getting into the particular innovation or direction or anything, grounding a community into conversations around what does this part of our mission look like? And do we all agree with this? Are we all on board? I mean, if you don't have everyone on board with your mission, that's a bigger problem, right? But to really build sort of shared understanding, shared commitment, shared interest in moving forward and deeper with that mission, I still find really valuable. And I try to identify people in the community. I use some of Everett Rogers' works. He talks about the diffusion of innovation. It's very old innovation work. But Roger's work was originally predicated. He would study, for example, public health interventions in other cultures and communities. So, for example, there was an issue where there was a village and they were drinking contaminated water, and it was hurting and getting people sick and possibly even causing death. And so some people from the outside came in and they tried to teach people about the public health benefits of boiling your water before drinking it. What they found was that only 2 people adopted the practice. Everyone else continued to be sick. When they investigated it further, one thing those 2 people had in common was they were also outsiders. They had actually moved to that village from an outside community. And so they were more willing to listen to someone from the outside. So part of this has to be conversations so that this is an idea that's growing from inside. If we're going to build some shared understanding and go in the same direction. And I intentionally, for example, I had to do a lot of work in technology innovation. I would identify, lunch was one of my favorite strategies. It doesn't seem like a big strategy, but I would identify people who were very valued and respected members of the community and also very strong opponents and Luddites to the idea. And I would sit down with them, not to convert them, not to change them, but to figure out how their wisdom could help me have better perspective on the situation. And I have to approach that with true integrity. I'm willing to change my position. I have to be willing. I can't just be going in to try to kind of convert them on my belief that maybe we should try some online learning. And from their comments, I try to identify something they're passionate about and then invite them into that part of the project without them having to buy into the whole thing. For example, when I started doing online learning work, I had a faculty member in the English department who was quite opposed to online learning, but he was also very troubled by the quality of research papers coming out from students. And so he ended up helping me and working with me to design a method and a system for helping students create higher quality research papers, which we actually used in our online writing courses, and it became a core piece. And then I got to celebrate him publicly in the faculty for his work on that. And over time, so it's a relational piece for me. I think it's about, building those relationships, learning, listening. That might not have been as practical as you were looking for, but that was the first thought that came to mind when you asked.
No, I love it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Tom, I know we're over time. What do you want to do?
Bernard, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. This is a treat we look forward to every year. And can I mention that you will be formally inaugurated on October the 22nd as the president of Concordia University, Nebraska. So we congratulate you on that. You'll be in our thoughts and prayers as you go through that in your term as president there. And just Bernard, thank you so much.
Thanks. Oh, by the way, open door policy, my email address, it's just bernard.bull@cune.edu. I love partnering, collaborating. If you're working on something, you just want to bounce an idea off of me, I'm happy to be available for that.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks.